94.3 The Dude is very grateful to our men and women in uniform. We're proud to recognize local members of our military by turning the spotlight on them right now in our Soldier Salute.
I'm your host, Sergeant First Class Retired Don Sorensen, and on today's Soldier Salute, we're speaking with United States Army veteran, Colonel Retired Dr. Bernard DeKoning. Dr. DeKoning, tell me about yourself.
Well, I was originally born in the Netherlands. I was about 10 months old when we immigrated to the United States. And growing up, we had lived in many different parts of the country because of my father's job. He was an engineer, and so he got transferred to many different places. We had also spent some time in Belgium, and then I went to college at the University of Illinois in Chicago, where I majored in biology and chemistry, and then applied to medical school, and surprisingly, I was accepted. Went to Rush Medical College for 4 years, and then after that, I spent 3 years in postgraduate training in family medicine. During my years in medical school, I took advantage of an Army scholarship. It's called the Health Profession Scholarship Program. With that, you incur a certain number of years of active duty service obligation. So they said, we have the perfect assignment for you. My wife and I were sent to the Netherlands. So we were there. We loved every minute of it. And it's because of my language skills. And I spoke Dutch, French, and German. And then I was at a juncture in my life where I decided, do I want to stay in the Army or do I want to resign my commission and become a civilian? And so my wife and I discussed it. And so we decided, well, let's stay in the Army. I think we're having a good time. And so that lasted 25 years, and then retired after 28 years of active federal service. We had lived in a lot of different places, met a lot of very wonderful people, many of whom we still maintain contact with. And 28 years, yes, we moved 19 times in those 28 years, but every single location we were at was just absolutely wonderful.
Dr. DeKoning, in recent years, it's almost like the word immigrants kind of became a dirty word. You've got a really interesting story. Why don't you tell our listeners about that?
Well, we immigrated to the U.S. in December 1956. I was 10 months old, and we immigrated under an act of Congress called the European Refugee Relief Act. That particular act was meant for those who had incurred a certain amount of suffering during World War II. My father had lost his father in a POW camp in World War II, and so he qualified for refugee status. So when this particular act of Congress was enacted, my father had already married my mother. They had me. They had no idea that they would even get a call from the U.S. consulate. Even though he had registered himself with the European Refugee Relief Commission, he hadn't heard anything, and so he thought, oh, probably so far down the list, they're not going to contact me. Well, then lo and behold, my dad was at work one day in September 56. He gets his phone call, and it was the U.S. consulate in Rotterdam. And they said, are you Mr. DeKoning? I said, yes, speaking. They said, well, you are eligible to immigrate to the United States. And he said, okay, let me talk it over with my wife. When do I need to be there? He said, well, the ship leaves in December, which is 3 months from now. He said, oh, okay. Doesn't give me a whole lot of time. I said, well, you're one of the last ones on the list that we contacted. And so my parents discussed it, and my mother was a little hesitant at first. She agreed, and so we wound up in the United States.
Dr. DeKoning, I think a lot of Americans miss out on the great benefits of growing up in a multilingual household. And you grew up speaking multiple languages, and your first duty station, you end up kind of getting sidetracked because of your language skills. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, when we were growing up, we'd always been around different languages. My parents are actually originally from the Netherlands, East Indies. It's now called Indonesia. And so my father was raised in a multilingual family, and so by extension, so were we, myself and my 3 younger sisters. Dutch was always spoken at home, along with English, and also some Indonesian. The Dutch that we speak at home is actually a mixture of Dutch and Indonesian. When we visited my relatives in the Netherlands, we'd always speak Dutch. I remember when I was 13 years old, my grandmother was having as her house guest her sister-in-law. Her name was Tante Nyo, and she only spoke Indonesian and Chinese. Well, she spoke a little bit of Dutch. She was more comfortable speaking Indonesian and Chinese, and so my grandmother, my aunt, were constantly speaking Indonesian, and I didn't understand a word they were saying. And so my father was translating for me because he spoke fluent Indonesian. And I learned a few words of Indonesian. And so that was all part of growing up, and even the what we ate at night, a lot of it was my mother cooked Indonesian. A lot of it was based on rice. And you have all of these Indonesian foods, bami goreng, sayur lodeh, and all of that, and besengek. And so all of that is what I grew up with. So coming into the Army and then living overseas was not a real culture shock for myself and also for my wife. My wife and I both grew up in a multilingual household, so we were very comfortable living in other cultures, and it was not just in Europe. We lived in Southwest Asia. We spent a year in Kuwait, so our kids learned Arabic. Our oldest daughter actually got to be very good in Arabic. Yeah, I learned a few phrases in Arabic. That came in handy years later when I deployed to Iraq, and so you kind of break the ice a little bit with the Iraqi nationals. And
Dr. DeKoning, your language skills came into you pretty useful while you were in the Army, but have they helped you any since you've left?
we have an academic affiliation with a university in the Netherlands. And that university is called In Holland University. And they send students every year to the Columbia VA healthcare system. These are students that are learning to become nurse practitioners and physician's assistants, what we call physician extenders. In Europe and in the Netherlands, nurse practitioners and physician assistants are just now starting to become used. Before, for instance, when we were in Europe in the 80s and 90s, I never met a nurse practitioner or PA outside of the U.S. military. But if you go into the local community, into what we call the host country, I never met a nurse practitioner or PA. It was unheard of. But now, the Netherlands at least, is starting to learn the advantages of having a nurse practitioner or PA. So In Holland University started sending their students to the Columbia VA. It's mostly to shadow our nurse practitioners, PAs. In an observation status, they get to learn how is a nurse practitioner utilized in a healthcare system that is not a private healthcare system, but is a healthcare system that is managed pretty much what you have in Europe. They always have fascinating stories to tell, and they come with their faculty. And so when I first met them, I started speaking Dutch with them, and I think they were caught totally off guard. I said, "Oh, you have a Dutch-speaking chief of staff." So every year there's a contingent of students that comes to Columbia VA. They get to go through the Dorn VA Medical Center, as well as rotating through our outlying clinics, the community-based outpatient clinics. We have 7 of them throughout the state. So that is always a very, very good experience with them. And then they also give us presentations on healthcare in the Netherlands, what it is that they experience and how their healthcare system is a little bit different than ours in terms of the business of healthcare. It's always come in handy wherever I was. Languages and being brought up in a multilingual household, I always say it's always much more advantageous than it was disadvantageous.
Dr. DeKoning, when I was first retiring from the military, I heard nothing but just nightmare stories about the VA. But I got to tell you, that's not what my case was. And as I've talked to more and more soldiers, retirees that are in the VA system, I'm learning that Dorn is actually developing a really good reputation as of late. As Chief of Staff, did you bring some of your experiences as a colonel, active duty United States Army, and use those to change some of the policies and practices, or?
Well, first I want to emphasize, it wasn't a one-man show. I work with a great team. We have a governing body called the PENTAD with the director, nurse executive, associate director, assistant director. So it has been very much the team effort. I just want to make sure that I did not single-handedly essentially turn Dorn around. It was really done by a lot of different people, and I have a lot of great staff that work under me and also great staff that work under my colleagues. And it was all very, very much a group effort. So when I came there as the chief of staff, I had already committed to staying there for the duration and for a long, long time. Because prior to me, there were a lot of rotating chiefs of staff. And sometimes that can be challenging in an organization when you have leadership that rotates in and out. So one of the things that had to occur was Dorn needed a stability in leadership. Now we have our director, Dr. Umar, and he's committed to the organization. So we have our 5 PENTAD members that are very, very much committed to the organization. And that's where it starts. Because the staff see that and they then start becoming committed to the organization. So it's really, it's a commitment that everybody makes to really making this the best VA healthcare system that we can.
Dr. DeKoning, there's measurements out there for everything, but how do you truly gauge your success when it comes to caring for our veterans?
I've always guided myself on 3 principles of a successful healthcare organization. First is availability, the second is affability, and the third is ability. Availability is the ability to get care in a timely manner. the VA actually has another word for it. It's called access. Still starts with an A and still the number one priority. And it is the number one priority of our patients. And we have invested a lot of resources into managing our appointments, outpatient appointments correctly, and managing our throughput in our emergency department. All that is the availability piece and the access. The second A is called affability. It's usually called patient experience or hospitality. Very much so a way of how you express yourself. And that is something that we constantly have to pay attention to. And then the third is called ability, and that's our technical expertise to practice our trade. However, if we don't succeed on the first two A's, if we do terrible in access, if we do terrible on the experience piece and the hospitality piece, yes, that's going to shape the way the veteran will view the quality of the care that they got. Because on the ability side, T's can be crossed, I's can be dotted, everything dress right dress, and absolutely the standard of care met. But in the patient's eyes and in their mind, they will say, I got terrible health care at Dorn or at one of our CBUCs because it took me forever to get an appointment. People were rude to me, And the fact that we were very able is lost because of the fact that we failed on the first two ways.
Dr. DeKoning, there are so many citizens here in the Columbia area that are veterans that probably could use a little bit of advice on how to make their experience with the VA a little bit better and a little bit easier.
I would say first and foremost, if you have an appointment, please keep your appointment. Missed appointments always a challenge in any healthcare organization, and we are no exception. Please keep your appointment. And if you cannot keep your appointment, please call and give us at least 48 hours notice that you are unable to make your appointment. But it's always very challenging if we have what we call a no-show for an appointment, because a no-show for one or a missed appointment for two, because not only is that appointment being held for that particular veteran who didn't show, but then there was another veteran that probably could have been seen at that time that couldn't because it was occupied for this veteran. The second is always maintain a healthy lifestyle. And we have a movement in the VA now. It's called Whole Health. Whole Health looks at the entire patient, or veteran rather, and it emphasizes healthy living, both physically and psychologically, helping them cope with the common everyday stresses. But that goes with healthy lifestyle. Yes, it's making sure you eat right, getting regular exercise, and also taking your medications. So all of that is all part of whole health. There are unique issues that our veterans deal with that you don't typically see on the outside. And so there are unique aspects of whole health that we are emphasizing. One of those unique aspects is the transition from being soldier, sailor, airman, Marine to veteran. That comes with some challenges. There are those that will carry with them their experiences, some of it good, some of it bad, that they experience while on active duty.
Thanks for joining us in our Soldier Salute, presented by Little Pigs Barbecue. Serving Columbia since 1963 with that bodacious buffet. By Lexington Guns and Shooting Range. Veteran owned and operated. By Carolina Honda Powerhouse. Motorcycles, ATVs, and side-by-sides with discounts for all military personnel. And Dominion Energy. We depend on